Hello, everyone. You are listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast presented by Great Railing. I am Jordan Hall, and I am thrilled to be joined by the Flyers pre- and post-game live crew, Joe Fordyce, our Flyers pre- and post-game live producer, and Ashlyn Sullivan, our Flyers pre- and post-game live host. And guys, it seems like you've had plenty of good things to talk about, which is refreshing. Travis Konecny has a hat trick last night. The Flyers win again. They're 6-1-0 in their last 7 games. Ashlyn, the more and more you see this team, how impressed are you with Konecny and what he's done?
Oh my gosh, yeah. And so much so every night we're talking about him. And at times I'm like, gosh, we keep mentioning him, but you can't talk about him enough. And he's in every single rundown we talk about. And he was basically 20 minutes of our post-game show last night, because how could he not be? And you just see him playing so consistently. And I love how low-key he is about everything. It's like, it's just puck luck. Well, it seems to be much more than that. But just his humble attitude, and you can tell. I mean, I remember my first practice with the Flyers, I think it was about 3 weeks ago, and we were asking guys in the locker room, and they were starting to admit, like, Travis is our best player, and I'd never heard that before. And now it's clear as day. He absolutely is the superstar of the team.
Yeah, Joe, do you think this is sustainable? Obviously, he's already matched his career high in goals with 24. He's on pace for close to 50, which I'm not sure anyone's really expecting him to reach. But how sustainable can he be as an everyday scorer, everyday player?
Well, I think, I mean, it is halfway through the season, so it's not that early. And he's managed to be consistent through the whole first half. And, he admittedly had a rough couple of years. I go back to a couple of years ago when he did an interview with Taryn on Media Day and said that he came into the season after the bubble and he was out of shape. And then, he gets married and has a baby, and there was a lot of things going on. And now it seems like he's back to, like he's found a routine, and came into camp in unbelievable shape. And, when they hired John Tortorella, I think a lot of times, Jordan and you and I on this podcast, we talked about and we tried to identify guys that were going to thrive and guys that maybe would have issues with John Tortorella. And I think we both agreed that Travis Konecny was either going to totally flourish under John Tortorella, or he was going to have big problems. And I think he's answered that question, because he came in, he got benched for that third period earlier in the season, and he's really hasn't looked back since. And it seems like this coach is getting the most out of this player, and I can't see a reason why that would change anytime soon. He already has equaled his career high in goals, and he just is everywhere. I mean, he could have scored 5 goals last night with the amount of chances that he had. And this is just a level of play that we haven't seen from Konecny before.
And I think one thing we've really learned is that patience really can be incredibly important. We use the word patience so much, but sometimes that can mean multiple years where you have to be patient. And you just forgot that Travis Konecny is only 25, and sometimes guys need the right environment, need the right coach. Sometimes it just takes time. And 2 things that really stood out to me: one, he's killing penalties this year, and he's been great at it. Sometimes guys that play in those situations, they're in the game more often, and they're just more involved, they're more engaged, and it gets them going. I think that's been huge for him. And a second thing is he just sounds more like a leader to me. Post-game at practice, like Ashlyn was saying, he's giving all the credit to his line mates. The other day, he kind of bristled at the fact that someone asked him, do you think you were snubbed? And he's like, no, Kevin Hayes deserves to be an all-star. I'm happy for him. I don't worry about being an all-star. So he just sounds more and more like a leader, which is important because he is the best player on the team now, and the Flyers need him to kind of lead this youth movement. So those are 2 things that really just stood out. Ashlyn, have you seen more of a guy that sounds like an established player, not as much a young player? He's more established now.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And even just my month and a half here, just you see him slowly starting to quickly progress and just be the superstar of this team. And I knew when I first came here that he was one of the highlight guys, but I didn't know the magnitude of what he could become. And we kind of saw this slowly building when he was matching his goal totals. And I think now that's the question that Joe just mentioned is, can he keep this up? I don't see any reason why not to. I think Coach Tortorella, I love last night's game when he kind of brought TK back down to earth. Not that I think he needs it, but for all of us who were so fired up to talk about him, he's like, hey, he's still screwing up. He's still messing things up. And I think that's a good thing because it shows he's not at that ceiling yet. And that should excite Flyers fans. If there's still so many things that he can improve on, what could his potential be if coach is saying, hey, he's not there yet?
That really is so funny. Like the coach comes out and says, yeah, he still screws up a good bit. And like this guy's on a crazy 10-game point streak. And it's like, yeah, it tells you maybe the ceiling's even higher. And that should be, I think, exciting for Flyers fans.
And you know what, Jordan, the thing that came that just came to mind too was when Ashlyn spoke to him last week before one of our pregame shows, and she asked him about, have you allowed yourself to think about, reaching the 40 goal mark? And it was almost like that was the first time anybody brought that up to him, which we know it isn't. But he was like, that wasn't really something that concerned him. And I think that is refreshing to see a guy that's not worried about, that if he scores 45 goals and he's on a last place team, like that's not okay with him. Yeah. He's not like looking at his scorecard every single night and kind of worried about those sort of things. And it's more about, like you both had alluded to, the leadership role that I don't really think was there before. And a lot of that might have to do with, I'm not sure that Travis Konecny has had a coach that has A, wanted, or B, demanded that he be a leader. A lot of that has to do with age, but not all coaches demand that kind of thing. I mean, there was always criticism of Claude Giroux and his ability to be a leader. And I think a little bit of that had to do with Giroux's personality, but I don't know that there was ever a coach here that demanded a player be a leader. Yeah. And I feel like Tortorella says, I'm going to be a leader, but I need to identify multiple players on this team that are also leaders too. Yeah. And it feels like Travis Konecny has taken the reins as one of those guys. And when you hear the coach talk about him, it's clear that they're in lockstep with that thinking.
Yeah. Flyers Talk is brought to you by Great Railing. Stop into Great Railing for the highest quality and lowest prices on all your railing, decking, and fencing needs. So we've spoken so much about the youth, and that was a major emphasis going into this season, was that the Flyers wanted to play some younger players. Now, these kids aren't 19, 20 years old, but they're all under 25. And I think even in-house, people like management and the coaching staff, they didn't know exactly what to expect from these young players. But I feel like there's been a handful of them now that are starting to take real serious strides. And I think that's a big reason why the team's 6-1-0. Ashlyn, if you can point out one of the younger players that have just kind of opened your eyes recently, who would it be and why?
I think especially after last night, it's Owen Tippett. And I just think it's fascinating when you see this Flyers team. And I think Coach Tortorella, every single time he has any media, everything, he's so big picture. And I think, at least from what I've seen with fans, that can be frustrating because you want to win right now. You want to know what's going on right now. And it almost seems like coach is coaching for this year and next year. But how could he not when you do have all these young guys? And I just think regardless of this streak the Flyers are on right now, or if we can even talk about playoffs here in a month, who knows if they're relevant, if you can point out 5 key pieces that are on an up trajectory, that seems like a success for the Flyers, because I think everyone can agree that it's not right here, right now that they're going to win all these games. You hope to progress here in a couple of years. And if you have key pieces you can build around, that's huge. And if you can name 5 of them, that's even bigger.
It's so true. I think a lot of people, the pro tankers, are saying, why are they winning? Why are they winning? But a lot of people in-house for the Flyers knew they had to learn about their kids. And if their kids are playing well and it results in wins, then that's the process. And it doesn't have to be about playoffs. If these young players take some strides and the Flyers learn about them going into next year, I think that's a real positive. Joe, how about you? Any young players that maybe have surprised you so far?
Well, I'm going to say Noah Cates, and I'm not going to say it for the traditional reasons. He's not always putting up stats. But you hear the coach consistently talk about his defensive responsibility, which is, I think, in all sports, the thing that plagues young players is the lack of defensive responsibility. You always hear about it in basketball. I mean, football, obviously, players are designated offense or defense, but, you know, that's not generally the, line one of the description of a young player is not about his defensive responsibility. With Cates, I feel like it is line one. And then the scoring's starting to come along. So I feel like this guy really can, is molding into a potential top 6 center. I'm not saying top 6 on this team. I'm saying top 6 on a contending team. This coach clearly goes out of his way to praise his play on a game-by-game basis. And when you really start to pay attention to it and you hear other guys like Konecny, I think it was I don't know if it was the Buffalo game or no, it was one of the road games recently. Konecny says, whenever any one of us screw up, Cates is always there to clean up the mess.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff people would say about Sean Couturier, who had played, how many games in this league? Not a guy who is really in his first full NHL season, and players and coaches talk about him like he's a 5-year veteran already. And I think that's what stands out to me the most.
Yeah, I thought there were 3 significant questions about 3 young players, and I think these 3 guys have answered them over the recent stretch. One was, can Noah Cates make the team? Not only did he make the team, but he's been their best defensive forward. So he has taken bigger strides than I probably anticipated. Another one was, is Morgan Frost a full-time NHL player? And right now he's looking more and more like he belongs in the league and he can play on a top 6 line if needed. And then Owen Tippett is he a third line guy that can maybe score 20 goals? And I mean, he could flirt with 25 to 30. So just 3 players that had big question marks. Like, are these guys going to be factors? And they've really taken significant strides. And I think that's why this team's surprising a little bit. And that kind of takes me into the next point. Ashlyn, do you think this team can maybe be a little more interesting in terms of playoff race, maybe putting itself around those group of teams where maybe it's not outside the realm of possibility that they could be in it come next month or around the trade deadline?
It certainly seems like that. And it's funny, I was talking to my dad about this last night. When you think about progression of a team and you think it's supposed to last all year, and just in my month and a half with the Flyers, I feel like the Flyers have gone through 3 phases of progression. When I first got here, they were losing really close games, and it was interesting, and it was always down the wire. It was relevant in the third period, and then they would lose in nail biter, and that weighs on you. And that arguably stinks more than a blowout loss. And Coach Tortorella was saying that a couple months ago. And then a couple weeks go by, now they're winning really close games. Same thing, nail biter in the third. You don't know what's going to happen, and they pull out and they win a couple of those. It's awesome. And now I think, especially after last night, you're seeing them consistently almost dominate the whole game and win. And normally that doesn't take a month and a half. Normally that takes a whole year to progress in that. So it just seems like they're progressing so quickly and they have so much momentum. And especially with a young team, I've found you almost have to fake believe at times. And when you do get a couple wins, the confidence for a young team is huge. That swagger, that motivation. And I think it was good. Coach Tortorella said yesterday that line is very clear, where they're flirting with the line of, being confident, but you obviously can't get cocky, especially when you look at the standings. We always said with the Jaguars at the end of the year, if you can be on the graphic, if you can be in the hunt on the very bottom line, that's all you can ask for as a broadcaster, as a sports fan, is just to be relevant when it matters most. And if the Flyers keep this up, I don't see how they couldn't be relevant when it matters.
Yeah, it's a great point about being on the graphic. Like, as long as you're in that picture, it gives young players something to play for. It gives the team something to play for. And yeah, it's just fascinating to see what confidence can do for these young players, where you piece together some wins and suddenly you go out there expecting to win, not hoping to win. Joe, how about you? Where do you think the Flyers could be in a month or so from now? They're 17, 18, and 7, and they're putting themselves in the picture. I'm not sure a lot of people are buying in that they're going to be in it in a couple of months, but I definitely think they have made it more interesting than many people expected.
Well, I think on a lot of levels, what you're seeing is so different from the past couple of years in the sense that things aren't snowballing on the team, things aren't snowballing on individual players. And in the end, I don't think they're a playoff team this year, but they're hard to play against. And that's kind of became a cliche the past couple of years. You heard a lot of players say we need to be harder to play against, but they are hard to play against. Like, listen, I don't know what it is. I mean, I know the Capitals are working Nick Backstrom and Tom Wilson back into their lineup, but if they came into the game last night saying like, oh, it's the Flyers, we're just going to show up and win, clearly that didn't happen. That didn't happen with Buffalo on Monday night. Not that Buffalo was in a position where they've been good for a long time and would expect that, but they were the highest scoring offense. They didn't score. They got shut out on their home ice. Now Toronto handled the Flyers pretty well, but the previous meeting with Toronto, they didn't. The Flyers made it tough on them in the end. So, and just to go back to your point about Morgan Frost, like, and I said things not snowballing individually on guys. So I would say this time, even if you go back to November, Morgan Frost, he seemed lost with what his game was. You would see him just kind of drift over the blue line with the puck. He would get stick checked, he would get poke checked before he even got to the circles. He didn't carry the puck into the zone with any sort of conviction. And I feel like now, not only is he doing that, he's got a confidence about him where he's creating his own shot. And I'll even say this. The game the other night when D'Angelo got benched, Frost's performance for a lot of that game was probably bench-worthy as well. He had some bad turnovers, two of them that directly turned into goals. But he bounces back. And I don't think he would have bounced back in November. I certainly don't think that he would have been out there the next game and been a noticeable player. He would have kind of faded into the background, and then you would find yourself asking that question that we've asked a lot over the last year and a half. Is this guy an NHL player? Because his game doesn't fit really in a bottom six and definitely not a fourth line role. But is he good enough to play in a top six role? And I feel like that question is being answered right now, and the signs are pointing up for that. And we've seen it before. Shane Gostisbehere was a player here where when his confidence was high, he was a totally different player than when his confidence was low. He could be the best player on the ice with confidence, or he could be the worst player on the ice if he had no confidence. And we saw those peaks and valleys with his game. And I'm not saying, I don't know that Morgan Frost's peaks and valleys are that extreme yet, and let's hope they don't get to be that extreme. But I think we're seeing the ability to make plays and the ability to bounce back when you make mistakes, because this coach is not anti-mistake. In fact, he's pro-mistake. Listen to him talk. He's all about how do you answer mistakes and what are the mistakes? Are the mistakes due to effort, or are they due to trying to make a play? I think he's okay with the trying to make a play, which is why he's okay with a game like Morgan Frost had the other night. Both of the turnovers resulted from him trying to make a play. And I think that's a big step in the right direction for a young player.
Opioid addiction is a national public health crisis. The Someone You Know podcast from the Independence Blue Cross Foundation offers inspiring stories that challenge stigma, offer hope, and humanizes the disease of addiction. Download the new season 3 of Someone You Know on all major podcast platforms. One thing I think I've learned is that the Flyers have some decent ingredients here, a lot more than they probably got credit for going into this year. There was a lot of national folks and a lot of people among the fan base that thought they were a mess going into this year in terms of just where they were from an organization standpoint of having some bigger contracts, some vets, maybe not enough youth. But I thought they could be better defensively, and that's what they are. I thought their decor was pretty good, and that was, I thought, the primary focus of the offseason was cut down on the goals against with a coach that has a track record of doing it, a young goalie, and a solid decor, and then see where you are up front. And they've had some younger players take real good steps to give them a chance to score goals. Travis Konecny is flourishing. Some young players are getting confidence, and you're seeing some solid pieces. So I think the Flyers definitely have some really good ingredients moving forward. I think they have better young players than people thought. They have some good draft picks coming up. And I think some of their core pieces that are a little older but not real old are proving that they can be impactful and be solid, consistent players. So I think that's just one thing I've learned, is that there are some good ingredients here, and they're not a mess. Do I think they're going to be a playoff team this year? No. I'm not even sure if they're going to be in it, because I think they're going to have some lumps along the way, because they still are young, and young players tend to go up and down sometimes in waves. Like a wave right now we're seeing is still up. But I do think the picture for the Flyers is not as bleak as some people thought it was going into this year. And if the Flyers make it interesting, I think that's a positive, because you'll put some more butts in seats. I think some people are going to be intrigued by the team. And I think that's where the Flyers are right now. I think they could have really, after that 10-game losing streak, they could have really snowballed, and it could have been a long, long season. Instead, they're somewhat in it. Ashlyn, how much are we going to learn about this team maybe over the next 2 games? Another matchup with the Capitals, who you got to think are chomping at the bit to face them again, and then the Bruins, the best team in the NHL. I think 2 more barometers here for the Flyers.
Yeah, these are rough. These are definitely speed bumps. I mean, if you can get one on the Capitals Saturday away, I think that's huge. That's beyond huge. And I don't think anyone's expecting the Flyers now to go beat the Caps on their home ice and then beat the Bruins on Monday. I think that's unrealistic. If you can go 1-1, and more so, I just think don't have an outcome like you did with Toronto. Make this game relevant, like we say in the third period. It's a nail biter. Even if they lose both these games, if it can be a nail biter in the third, once again, you're seeing the progression, and fans don't want to hear that, but it is a big picture right now with the Flyers. It's not about winning these 2 games and staying in the hunt. If they can be relevant, that's huge for the big picture of this team.
Jordan, if I could just wanted to follow up too on what you were just saying about, where the Flyers are right now. You had mentioned, I don't think they're going to be a playoff team and they may not be in it. A big factor there is the trade deadline. And if this truly is about the big picture, you might have to sell off some of the pieces that are helping you this season to benefit future seasons. JVR is a perfect example. I mean, he's got 1 year left on his deal. He can score goals. He can help somebody's power play. That's an attractive piece. So, that's going to be a decision. But what you want to see is the Flyers make it tough on the front office to make that decision. Because if there's a question about what they're doing at the trade deadline, is progress. Because I think all of us said, well, at the trade deadline, you're going to dump this, and this. And now that's not as clear cut. And, in terms of the next 2 games, I totally agree with Ashlyn that it's unrealistic to expect that they're going to win both of these games. The Capitals will come out loaded on their home ice to get revenge for what happened on Wednesday. And then, the Bruins are one of these teams where I feel like every season you hear like, okay, they're getting old. This is going to be their come down to earth year. I feel like they're almost like the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like they're never an irrelevant team. And not only are they not irrelevant, I mean, how many do they have? 2 losses on their home ice in regulation the whole season? Like it's hard to fathom what's going on. And the captain of their team's 38 years old and just playing like he's 28. Of course, David Pastrnak doing what he normally does, so that's not surprising to anyone. they just keep on rolling no matter what. I mean, they had injury issues coming into the season, and all of it seems to go – that all seems like distant memories at this point when you look at their place in the standings. I mean, they have to be getting bored almost at this point with their lead in the division and the conference. Because I think at last look they were 12 points ahead of Toronto. I mean, that's just crazy. And we've got a good look at how good Toronto is. So it's hard to fathom that a team has gotten out to that sort of pace, especially a team that everyone thought this was going to be their come back to earth year. But as I said, it feels like that's a theme almost 3 years in a row now, and it just doesn't happen. I mean, a few years ago, they let their quarterback of their power play, Torrey Krug, go, and everybody thought that was the beginning of the downturn. Charlie McAvoy steps up to their top pair, Matt Grzelcyk, all these guys. It's like they manufacture these guys that know how to run power plays. Yeah. And it's another team that most good teams do. They thrive on their power play, and that Bruins team hasn't missed a beat. And they, in my opinion, a few years ago, Torrey Krug was the best power play guy in the NHL. And they let him go as a free agent and haven't missed a beat since. Now, they haven't won a Stanley Cup, but they've been in the mix every single season.
Yeah, the NHL the other day sent out some number-based things at the halfway point, and they said the Bruins were on pace for 129 points, which is just absolutely insane. That's how well they've played. So I'm with Ashlyn and you, Joe. It is somewhat about moral victories in this spot, because I don't think anyone's expecting the Flyers to go like 8-1-0, 9-1-0 in these 10-game chunks. So if you're in it in the third period against Boston, that's great. Like competitive games where guys can learn, whether it's through success or failure late in games, like real positives, because the last thing you want to see is Toronto. Like you don't want to see those losses where you're just blown out of the water and you're not even competitive. So I think competitive losses, or maybe taking one of the two, real positive for the Flyers. And Joe, yeah, you're right. The trade deadline could be really interesting. They're going to sell, like no matter what, like they will be selling unless they honestly go into that trade deadline with like a 20-game winning streak. But the fact is, the Flyers, if they feel like they're taking really good steps this year, then they're going to want to supplement this in the summer. And the best way to give yourself a really good chance to supplement things in the summer is the trade deadline. Like start gearing up for the summer by gaining assets for the summer at the trade deadline, putting yourself in the best possible position in the summer to give your team a better chance next year. So that's where like the season could probably go a little further south too, is you shed some really good players to gain assets. Like James Van Riemsdyk is a big reason why Owen Tippett and Morgan Frost are playing so well. He's a veteran guy that like has been around and knows how to play with young guys, knows how to build confidence in younger players. And if they shed him and suddenly he's gone, like your younger players are probably going to take a step back. But it'll be important because the Flyers, really need to make sure they build off of what they have right now. And that'll lead to the summer where some even bigger decisions will be made.
Yeah. And, Jordan, here's the other thing, too. So you had mentioned earlier about how, fans don't want to hear this, like it's not about this year and this big picture talk. And Ashlyn was talking about it, too. But the thing is, when you take a scope of the fans, you hear a lot of this, like ownership needs to be replaced and GMs need to be replaced and this guy needs to be replaced and that guy needs to be replaced. Those are all big picture things. But then when it comes to winning games, they don't want to hear about the big picture. So there's no way to please everyone. It just, you have to. This is not a Stanley Cup contender this season. So if it's not a Stanley Cup contender this season, you have to look toward the future. And that's where this team is right now. And they're not the only team in the NHL that's like that. There's teams in every sport where they are getting rid of big pieces in order to look to the future. Just look at in the NFL. I mean, Christian McCaffrey might be the best player in the NFL, and the Carolina Panthers traded him this year because they didn't have a chance to win this year with him. You have to – these are the decisions that have to be made. And, because everyone now has the ability to just spew their arguments out whenever they want, you get a lot of this sort of feedback that no one, you can't please everyone. And the object isn't to please everyone, because if everybody has the same goal to be in contention at some point, as soon as possible, then everyone would be, pleased. So it's kind of a fine line to walk, but it's clear what this team has to do. And like you said, they're going to sell. They have to.
Ashlyn, this is probably a tough question, but I want to ask you, are you surprised there's so many kind of like pro tank fans right now with the Flyers? Like, did you expect that? I will say, I think there's a much larger portion of fans that like want the team to win. I think they're just a tad quieter on the internet compared to the pro tank. But is that a part of sports? When a team is in a tough spot, they probably want you to lose so you can gain draft picks and build for the future.
Yeah, I will never forget 2018. The Jaguars were neck and neck, or not 2019. The Jaguars were neck and neck with the Jets for the number 1 overall pick, and the Jaguars won that game to give them the number 1 overall pick. And the Jaguars they were public enemy number 1 on the internet. Like, how dare you ruin this and win this game? And it was or the Jets. And I think it's the dumbest argument in sports when fans ask a team to tank. That is like asking your accountant to lose you money and not do your job. They would get fired. Like, it's almost disrespectful to the coaches, the players in the sport. Say, hey, don't do your job, and worry about us in the future. Like, that's not their job. Their job is to win games right now. So I never understand this argument. I get why fans want it, but it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in any sports you cover or love. So the argument is it's a merry-go-round. You're never going to get what you want. So I don't get why we go on Twitter and just freak out over winning 6 out of 7 games. It just makes no sense to me.
The other thing too, Jordan, is this is a city that watched the Sixers do it for 4 seasons in a row. And really, what did they get out of it? They got a number 1 pick that turned out to be Ben Simmons, and we all know how the city feels about him. They got a number 1 pick that turned out to be Markelle Fultz, who had 0 impactful games for the Sixers. So tanking to get the number 1 pick while Connor Bedard seems like, the real deal, it doesn't, first of all, with the lottery, it doesn't guarantee you the number 1 pick. And number 2, it doesn't guarantee you wins. Not in any sport. I mean, they look in the NFL. I mean, Ashlyn covered the Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence was a number 1 pick. They haven't won any playoff games yet.
Yeah.
And it's tough for a quarterback to develop. I get that, but there's this perception that if you get number 1 pick, then you're going to start winning, and that's not what happens. The Sixers are the best example of this. They had a full front office that was all in board in lockstep with them losing and winning 10 games a season, and the stands were empty. And it was, well, we're going to get Ben Simmons, and well, we're going to get Markelle Fultz. And what happened? The Celtics got Jason Tatum in a pick that the Sixers traded to them so they could have number 1. How's that worked out? Jason Tatum's going to be a Hall of Famer, and Markelle Fultz, nobody could even tell you what team he's on. And then, of course, obviously the Ben Simmons. So, I mean, it's tanking. It's almost like there's the karma of doing that catches up with you. Because if you even look around sports and the teams that have tried to do this, can you think of one that won a championship? I really can't.
Yeah, I know the Penguins, obviously, they were really bad, and then they landed, what was it, Crosby, Malkin.
Right, but that was before tanking was really like a trend in sports. Yeah. I'm more talking about, like, I feel like in the last 5 years, tanking has become this big thing in sports. Yeah. And if you look around sports, I don't know anybody that it's worked for yet.
No, I agree. And to me, it's just the really good teams take pride in scouting and player development and hitting on players in the draft in the teens and the 20s. Like, especially in the NHL, you can find really, really good players in the mid first round, late first round. And if you hit on those guys, you know, you don't have to be awful to hit on those guys. You can have an okay season, or you can make the playoffs and get bounced, and then do a really good job drafting and developing the next 2 years. So that's my take on it too. I don't think you should lose on purpose, like Ashlyn said. I just don't know what kind of message it sends to your current roster, where you admit to not wanting to win or thinking you guys can't win. Like, that's why I think the Flyers have been a little hush hush on rebuild and retool and all those buzzwords, because what message does it send to the guys you're trying to build around or hoping to learn from? Like, if you just flat out say, we don't think we can win, you don't have to go out there and say we're going to win the Stanley Cup or make the playoffs, but you also don't have to say, hey, we're going to be god awful. So, you know, maybe a little more transparency with the fan base can be good, but at the same time, I'm not against not using those words either. I think you can kind of play it down the middle and take a we'll see approach and just learn about your team and then go from there. But
yeah, and Jordan, just to follow up too, like, look at the Edmonton Oilers.
Yeah.
They had 7 number 1 overall picks in a 12-year span? Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Connor McDavid. And I mean, Nugent-Hopkins took a long time to develop, but McDavid has been a superstar since the moment he stepped on the NHL ice, and they've won 2 playoff series?
Yeah.
I mean,
last year was the first year they really kind of did something in the playoffs. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's and this is a generational player, one that Connor Bedard is being compared to. So just take a look at that. They haven't won anything.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they won't, but I'm also saying that there's a lot of buzz talking about, is Edmonton going to waste Connor McDavid's career?
Mm-hmm.
So there's no guarantees.
That's the truth. Yeah. And I just think, like, Claude Giroux was picked in the 20s of the first round. Joel Farabee was picked in the teens, I think at 14. So, yeah, I think the point being, you can find some really, really good players, foundation type of players later in the draft. It's not like you have to load up on top 3 picks, but that's going to be a discussion that we're probably going to be having, and fans are going to want to talk about the rest of the season. I'm sure Ashlyn, Joe, and you all will have to probably talk about it on pre and post game live, but no one's really going to complain when the team's going 6-1-0 and 7-game stretches. It's going to make it interesting. And we were talking a little bit before the podcast. It might be the most interesting team we've had for here in Philadelphia with the Flyers, probably maybe 2 years. So I think everyone's going to be following us and see what goes on with this team moving forward. But it was so fun chatting, guys. Ashlyn, thank you so much for coming on, and we can't wait to watch you on pre and post game live coming up here. Joe Fordyce, thank you so much. Can't wait to see what you guys have in store for the shows coming up. A special thank you to Ben Berry, our podcast producer and guru, for always being flexible with our time. And Flyers fans, of course, as always, thank you so much for listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast presented by Great Railing. Wherever you get your podcast, please rate and listen, and we can't wait to talk to you next time.